250 stories in 250 years. The best bedtime reading for sleeping. Chapter 2, The Magna Carta. A story of freedom. It's a quiet evening, my dear. The moon hangs low in the sky, like a soft lantern glowing through the window, and the world outside has settled into a gentle hush. No loud noises, no hurried footsteps, just the faint rustle of leaves and the steady beat of your own breath. Tonight, we are going to tell a story, not a fairy tale with dragons and princesses, though it has its own kind of magic. This is a story about words, about courage, and about a piece of parchment that changed the world, even long before America was a country. It's the story of the Magna Carta, and how its whispers of freedom traveled across oceans and time to shape the land we call home. Close your eyes for just a moment, and let your mind drift back, way back, more than 800 years ago, to a small island called England. The year is 1215, and the air smells of wood smoke and rain, of horses and hay, of the damp earth that clings to the boots of travelers. There are no skyscrapers here, no cars, no phones, just castles with stone walls that reach toward the sky, villages with thatched roofs, and roads made of dirt that turn to mud when it rains. The people who live here wear woolen clothes and leather shoes, and their days are filled with work, farming the land, weaving cloth, building homes, and serving the powerful men who rule over them. In this time, there is a king. His name is King John, and he is not a kind king. He is greedy, and he is cruel, and he believes that because he is king, he can do whatever he wants. No rules, no limits, no one to tell him no. Imagine, if you will, a boy or a girl just like you, living in a small village. Every day, they work hard, tending to the cows, gathering firewood, helping their family cook and clean. But then, the king's men come. They demand money, taxes, they call it, money that the family doesn't have. If they can't pay, the king's men take their cows, their crops, their home, even their freedom. They might throw them in a dark dungeon, where the only light comes from a tiny window, and the only sound is the drip of water and the groans of other prisoners. King John didn't care about the people. He cared only about power and gold. He fought wars that cost a fortune, and when he ran out of money, he taxed the people more and more. He seized land from noblemen who disagreed with him, and he put them in prison without a trial. No chance to say they were innocent, no one to stand up for them. He even fought with the church, the most powerful institution of the time, and was excommunicated, kicked out of the church, because he refused to listen to the Pope. The people grew tired. The noblemen, who had once supported the king, grew angry. They had had enough of his tyranny, enough of his greed, enough of living in fear. One of those noblemen was a man named Robert Fitzwalter. He was brave, and he was fair, and he believed that even a king should have to follow the rules. He gathered other noblemen around him, men who were tired of seeing their people suffer, men who wanted to protect their lands and their families. They called themselves the rebel barons, and they decided to stand up to King John. They gathered an army, not to fight a war, though they were ready, but to make the king listen. They marched to London, and the people of London, who were also tired of the king's cruelty, opened their gates to them. Suddenly, King John was alone. His army was small, his people were angry, and the rebel barons were at his door. The king had no choice. he had to meet with the rebel barons. They chose a place called Runnymede, a quiet meadow by the River Thames, where the grass was green and the water flowed gently. It was June 15th, 1215, a day that would go down in history. The air was warm, and the sun shone down on the gathered men. The king, in his rich robes of red and gold, the rebel barons, in their armor, their swords at their sides, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, a wise man who had helped draft the document that would change everything. The document was called the Magna Carta, which means Great Charter in Latin. It was written on a piece of parchment, thick, yellowed paper made from animal skin, and it was covered in handwriting, neat and precise, in Latin. The Magna Carta was not a long document, but it held words that were more powerful than any sword. It said that even the king was not above the law. It said that no one could be put in prison without a trial, that no one's property could be taken away without a reason, that the king could not tax the people without their consent. It was a list of promises, a contract between the king and his people, that ensured everyone, even the most powerful, had to play by the rules. King John did not want to sign it. He frowned, and he grumbled, and he tried to argue. But the rebel barons stood firm. They told him that if he did not sign, they would fight, and they would take his throne. Slowly, reluctantly, the king picked up his seal, a large, metal stamp with his coat of arms, and pressed it into hot wax at the bottom of the parchment. The wax cooled, hard and shiny, and the Magna Carta was official. The rebel barons cheered, and the people of England breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time, a king had agreed that he was not above the law. But the story does not end there, my dear. King John was not a man of his word. As soon as the rebel barons left Runnymede, he sent a message to the Pope, asking him to annul the Magna Carta, to say it was not valid. The Pope, who was angry with the rebel barons for challenging the king, agreed. He declared the Magna Carta null and void, and soon England was at war. The rebel barons fought against the king's army, and the country was torn apart by conflict. But then, something happened. King John died. He fell ill, and he breathed his last breath in a small castle, far from the power and glory he had once craved. King John's son, Henry III, was only 9 years old when he became king. He was too young to rule, so a group of wise men called a regency took over. They knew that the Magna Carta was important, that it was the key to peace in England. So, in 1216, they reissued the Magna Carta, removing some of the clauses that had been too controversial, but keeping the most important ones. They reissued it again in 1225, and again in 1297, when Henry III's son, Edward I, became king. Each time, the Magna Carta was strengthened, and each time, it became more and more a part of England's laws. As the years passed, the Magna Carta was forgotten by some, but it was never truly lost. It was copied and recopied, stored in monasteries and castles, read by lawyers and scholars who recognized its power. It became a symbol of freedom, a reminder that no one, not even a king, could have absolute power. And then, hundreds of years later, something remarkable happened. People from England began to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to a new land, a land of forests and rivers, of mountains and plains, a land where they could start fresh, away from the tyranny and oppression they had known in their homeland. These people were the Pilgrims, and the Puritans, and the colonists who would one day build America. They brought with them their traditions, their beliefs, and their memories of the Magna Carta. They remembered the words that had freed their ancestors, that no one should be imprisoned without a trial, that no one's property should be taken away unjustly, that the government should serve the people, not the other way around. These ideas became the foundation of the colonies, and as the colonists grew more and more unhappy with the rule of the British king, King George III, who was acting just like King John so many years before, they turned to the Magna Carta for inspiration. Let's fast forward to the 1700s, my dear. The American colonies are thriving, but they are also angry. The British king is taxing them without their consent, just like King John taxed the English people. He is sending soldiers to live in their homes, to take their property, to arrest them without a trial. The colonists have had enough. They gather together, and they write a document called the Declaration of Independence. In it, they say that all men are created equal, that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the government's job is to protect these rights, and if it fails, the people have the right to change it. These words are not new. They are echoes of the Magna Carta, of the idea that power should be limited, that rights should be protected. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, was a student of history. He read the Magna Carta, and he studied its clauses. He knew that the ideas in the Magna Carta were the building blocks of freedom. When the colonists fought the American Revolution, they were fighting not just for independence from Britain, but for the principles of the Magna Carta, principles that had been passed down through the centuries. And when they won the war, and when they set out to create a new government, they turned to the Magna Carta again. The U.S. Constitution, which was written in 1787, is filled with ideas from the Magna Carta. The Fifth Amendment, which says that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, comes directly from Clause 39 of the Magna Carta. The Sixth Amendment, which guarantees a fair trial by jury, is another echo of the Magna Carta. Even the idea of a system of checks and balances, where the President, the Congress, and the courts all have power to limit each other, comes from the Magna Carta's principle that no one should have absolute power. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, my dear. Let's go back to the Magna Carta itself, to the words that started it all. Let's imagine what it was like to be there, in Runnymede, on that warm June day in 1215. Let's imagine the sound of the River Thames flowing by, the rustle of the grass in the wind, the voices of the noblemen arguing, negotiating, hoping for a better future. Let's imagine the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, holding the parchment in his hands, his face serious, knowing that this document would change the course of history. Let's imagine King John, his face red with anger, but knowing he had no choice but to sign. And let's imagine the rebel barons, their hearts filled with hope, knowing that they were standing up for what was right. The Magna Carta had 63 clauses, each one a promise. Some of them were about feudal rights, rights that mattered to the noblemen, like the right to inherit land without paying too much money to the king. Some of them were about justice, like the right to a fair trial, or the right to be judged by your peers. Some of them were about the church, like the right of the church to be free from the king's control. But the most important clause, the one that would echo through the ages, was clause 39. It said, "No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." Think about that, my dear. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. That means that no one can be put in jail just because someone in power doesn't like them. No one can have their home or their belongings taken away without a good reason. No one can be punished without a fair trial. That was a revolutionary idea in 1215, when kings thought they could do whatever they wanted. And it's still a revolutionary idea today, because there are still places in the world where people are imprisoned without a trial, where their rights are taken away, where they live in fear. But the Magna Carta reminds us that freedom is possible, that justice is possible, that even the most powerful can be held accountable. Now, let's meet some of the people who made the Magna Carta possible. We already met King John, the cruel king who was forced to sign. But there were other people, too, people who had the courage to stand up for what was right. There was Robert Fitzwalter, the leader of the rebel barons. He was a wealthy nobleman, but he cared about the people. He had seen the suffering caused by King John's tyranny, and he decided to do something about it. He gathered the other barons, and he led them in their fight for justice. He was not perfect, no one is, but he had courage, and that is what mattered. Then there was Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a wise man, a scholar who had studied law and religion. He knew that the king's power needed to be limited, and he helped the rebel barons draft the Magna Carta. He was a peacemaker, someone who wanted to end the conflict between the king and the barons without bloodshed. He believed that the church should be free, and that the people should be treated fairly. He played a crucial role in the negotiations at Runnymede, and without him, the Magna Carta might never have been written. There were also the ordinary people, the farmers, the blacksmiths, the weavers, who supported the rebel barons. They were the ones who suffered the most under King John's rule. And they were the ones who stood behind the barons, cheering them on, giving them food and shelter. They may not have been named in the Magna Carta, and they may not have had any power, but they were the heart and soul of the movement. They believed in a better future, and they were willing to fight for it. And then there was young Rupert, a 12-year-old boy who was the son of a parchment maker. Rupert's father made the parchment that the Magna Carta was written on, and Rupert helped him, soaking the animal skins, scraping them clean, drying them in the sun. He was there in Runnymede on that June day, watching as the king signed the document. He didn't fully understand what it meant at the time, but he knew it was important. He knew that the words on that parchment would change things for his family, for his village, for everyone in England. Years later, when he was an old man, he would tell his children and grandchildren about that day, about the king, the barons, and the great charter that had set the people free. The Magna Carta was not perfect, my dear. It did not give rights to everyone. At the time, it only applied to free men, noblemen, knights, and wealthy merchants. It did not apply to serfs, the poor farmers who worked the land and were treated like property. It did not apply to women, who had few rights and were often treated as second-class citizens. It did not apply to children, who were often forced to work and had no say in their own lives. But it was a start. It was a first step toward a more just world, a world where everyone's rights are protected. Over the centuries, the Magna Carta was reinterpreted, and its principles were expanded. Lawyers and scholars argued that the rights in the Magna Carta should apply to all people, not just free men. They used the Magna Carta to fight for the rights of the poor, the rights of women, the rights of children. They used it to argue against slavery, against segregation, against any form of oppression. And slowly, over time, the ideas of the Magna Carta spread across the world. In the 1800s, when the United States was fighting a civil war to end slavery, Abraham Lincoln turned to the Magna Carta. He believed that all men are created equal, and he used the principles of the Magna Carta to argue that slavery was wrong. He said that the Magna Carta was the great charter of human liberty, and that it was the foundation of all free governments. When he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves, he was continuing the legacy of the Magna Carta, extending freedom to those who had been denied it. In the 1900s, women fought for the right to vote, and they used the Magna Carta to support their cause. They argued that if the Magna Carta guaranteed rights to free men, it should also guarantee rights to women. They marched, they protested, they spoke out, and eventually, they won the right to vote with the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Again, the legacy of the Magna Carta was extended to include more people, to make freedom more inclusive. Today, the Magna Carta is still alive. It is not just a piece of old parchment in a museum. It is a living document, a reminder of the power of words, the courage of those who stand up for what is right, and the importance of freedom and justice. For original copies of the 1215 Magna Carta still exist. 2 in the British Library in London, 1 in Lincoln Castle, and 1 in Salisbury Cathedral. They are fragile, yellowed with age, but they still hold the power to inspire. When you visit a museum and see the Magna Carta, you are looking at a piece of history that has shaped the world we live in. You are looking at the words that inspired the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. You are looking at the words that have given people around the world the courage to fight for their freedom, to stand up against oppression, to demand justice. But the Magna Carta is not just for museums, my dear. It is for all of us. It reminds us that we have rights, that no one can take away our freedom, our dignity, our right to a fair trial. It reminds us that we have a responsibility to stand up for those whose rights are being violated, to fight for justice, to make the world a better place. It reminds us that even one person, with courage and determination, can make a difference. Let's think about what the Magna Carta means for you, right now, as you lie here, safe and warm, listening to this story. It means that you have the right to be treated fairly, to be heard, to be safe. It means that no one can hurt you or take away your belongings without a good reason. It means that you have the right to learn, to grow, to dream. It means that you are free to be yourself, to love who you love, to believe what you believe. All of these rights, all of these freedoms, have their roots in the Magna Carta, in the words that were written more than 800 years ago. Now, let's tell a little story within a story about a boy named Thomas, who lived in England in the 1300s, long after the Magna Carta was signed. Thomas was a serf, which meant he worked the land for a nobleman. He had no freedom. He couldn't leave the village without permission. He couldn't own land. He couldn't even marry without the nobleman's consent. But Thomas had heard stories about the Magna Carta, stories about how it had given rights to free men. He wondered why those rights didn't apply to him, to his family, to all the serfs who work so hard. One day, a traveling scholar came to the village. He was an old man with a long white beard, and he carried a book with him, a book that contained the words of the Magna Carta. Thomas snuck away from his work to listen to the scholar read. He listened as the scholar read Clause 39. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. Thomas raised his hand and asked, "Sir, what about us? What about the serfs? Are we not men too? Do we not deserve the same rights?" The scholar looked at Thomas, and he smiled. "You are right, young one," he said. "The Magna Carta does not yet give you rights, but it is a seed that has been planted, and it will grow. One day, the ideas of the Magna Carta will spread, and they will include you, and your family, and all people who are treated unfairly. One day, freedom will be for everyone." Thomas didn't understand it all at the time, but he held on to those words. He told his friends and his family about the Magna Carta, about the seed that would grow. He worked hard, and he dreamed of a day when he would be free. And over time, that seed did grow. The Magna Carta was reinterpreted, and the rights it guaranteed were extended to more and more people. Eventually, serfdom was abolished in England, and Thomas's descendants were free to own land, free to travel, free to live their lives as they chose. All because of the seed that was planted in Runnymede, all because of the words of the Magna Carta. Another story, a girl named Sarah, who lived in the American colonies in the 1700s. Sarah was a young girl, about your age, and she loved to read. Her father was a lawyer, and he had a copy of the Magna Carta, an old, tattered book with Latin words that Sarah could barely read. But her father would read it to her, and he would explain what the words meant. He would tell her about King John, about the rebel barons, about the day they signed the Magna Carta. He would tell her that the Magna Carta was the foundation of freedom, and that the colonists were fighting to protect those freedoms from the British king. One day, British soldiers came to their town. They knocked on doors, demanding food and shelter, and they arrested a man who had spoken out against the king. Sarah was scared, but she remembered what her father had told her about the Magna Carta. She remembered that no one should be arrested without a trial, that no one should have their home invaded without a reason. She went to her father and said, "Father, why are the soldiers doing this? Why aren't they following the Magna Carta?" Her father sighed. "Because the British king does not respect the Magna Carta," he said. "He thinks he is above the law, just like King John did. But we will fight back. We will stand up for our rights, for the freedoms that the Magna Carta gave us. We will build a new country, a country where the law is above the king, where everyone's rights are protected." Sarah nodded. She knew that her father was right. She knew that the Magna Carta was not just a story from the past, it was a promise for the future. And when the American Revolution began, Sarah's father joined the army, fighting for freedom. Sarah stayed home, but she helped too. She sewed clothes for the soldiers, she cooked food, she carried messages. She knew that she was part of something bigger, part of the legacy of the Magna Carta. After the war, when the United States was founded, Sarah's father helped write the state constitution for their state. He included clauses that came directly from the Magna Carta, clauses about fair trials, about protecting property, about limiting the power of the government. Sarah grew up, and she told her own children and grandchildren about the Magna Carta, about the part her father played in the American Revolution, about the importance of freedom and justice. And so the legacy of the Magna Carta lived on, passed down from generation to generation. My dear, the Magna Carta is more than just a document. It is a symbol of hope, a symbol of courage, a symbol of the belief that all people deserve to be free. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, when tyranny and oppression seem to rule, there are people who will stand up for what is right. It is a reminder that words have power, that a single piece of parchment, filled with words of justice and freedom, can change the world. As we sit here, on this quiet evening, let's think about the people who fought for the Magna Carta, the rebel barons, Stephen Langton, Rupert the parchment maker's son, Thomas the serf, Sarah the colonist. Let's think about the courage they had, the sacrifices they made, the hope they had for a better future. Let's think about how their actions, more than 800 years ago, have shaped the world we live in today. Let's also think about our own role. We may not be fighting a war, or signing a great charter, but we can still stand up for what is right. We can be kind to others, we can speak out when we see injustice, we can protect the rights of those who are weaker than us. We can carry on the legacy of the Magna Carta, in our own small way, every day. The moon is higher in the sky now, my dear, and the world is even quieter. The story of the Magna Carta is a long one, but it is a beautiful one, a story of freedom, of courage, of hope. It is a story that has been told for 800 years, and it will be told for 800 more, because it is a story that matters. As you drift off to sleep, remember the words of the Magna Carta. Remember that you are free, that you are loved, that you have the right to be happy and safe. Remember that you are part of a great legacy, a legacy of freedom that began in a meadow by the River Thames, with a group of brave men who dared to stand up to a king. And tomorrow, when you wake up, remember that you have the power to make a difference, to be kind, to be brave, to stand up for what is right. Because the legacy of the Magna Carta is not just in the past, it is in you, in me, in all of us now. Close your eyes, my love. Let the sound of my voice lull you to sleep, and let the story of the Magna Carta be your lullaby. Dream of Runnymede, of the River Thames, of the brave men who signed the Great Charter. Dream of a world where everyone is free, where everyone is treated fairly, where everyone's rights are protected. That is the dream of the Magna Carta, and it is a dream that will never die. Good night, my dear. Sleep tight. And remember, freedom is a gift that was given to us by those who came before us, and it is our job to protect it, to cherish it, to pass it on. The Magna Carta, a story of freedom, a story of courage, a story for all time. Let's continue our journey through the Magna Carta's history, my dear, because there is so much more to tell. We've talked about King John, the rebel barons, and the day they signed the Great Charter at Runnymede. But what happened after that? How did a document that was almost forgotten become one of the most important in the world? Let's dive deeper into the centuries that followed, and see how the Magna Carta's light continued to shine, even when the world was dark. After King John's death and the reissuing of the Magna Carta in 1216, 1225, and 1297, the document became a part of England's legal system. But for many years, it was not widely known or celebrated. It was stored in monasteries and government buildings, read only by lawyers and scholars. The average person had never heard of it, and even those who didn't fully understand its importance. But that began to change in the 16th century, when a new wave of interest in the Magna Carta swept across England. In the 1500s, England was going through a period of great change. The Church was split, with the Protestant Reformation challenging the power of the Catholic Church. Kings and queens were fighting for more power, and people were beginning to question the idea of absolute monarchy. It was during this time that lawyers and scholars began to rediscover the Magna Carta. They studied its clauses, and they realized that it was a powerful tool to limit the power of the king. One of these scholars was Sir Edward Coke, a famous lawyer and judge who lived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Sir Edward Coke was a firm believer in the rule of law, and he saw the Magna Carta as the foundation of English liberty. He argued that the Magna Carta was not just a historical document, it was a living law that applied to all English people, even the king. He used the Magna Carta to argue against the divine right of kings, the idea that kings were chosen by God and could do no wrong. Sir Edward Coke wrote a series of books about the Magna Carta, explaining its clauses and its importance. He argued that the Magna Carta guaranteed certain ancient rights that were given to the English people by God and could not be taken away by any king or government. These rights included the right to a fair trial, the right to be free from arbitrary imprisonment, and the right to property. Sir Edward Coke's writings made the Magna Carta famous again, and they inspired a new generation of people to fight for their rights. In the 17th century, England was torn apart by a civil war between the king, Charles I, and Parliament. The parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, believed that the king had too much power, and they used the Magna Carta to support their cause. They argued that the king was violating the Magna Carta by taxing the people without their consent, by imprisoning people without a trial, and by ignoring the laws of the land. The Civil War ended with the execution of Charles I, and for a short time, England became a republic. But even after the monarchy was restored, the Magna Carta remained an important symbol of liberty. During this time, the Magna Carta also began to influence other countries. In Scotland, a similar document called the Scottish Declaration of Arbroath was written in 1320, which drew inspiration from the Magna Carta. In France, during the French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, written in 1789, included many ideas from the Magna Carta, ideas about liberty, equality, and the rule of law. Even in countries far from England, like Japan and India, the Magna Carta's principles began to take root, inspiring people to fight for their freedom. But perhaps the most important influence of the Magna Carta was on the American colonies, as we talked about earlier. The colonists, who were mostly of English descent, brought with them a deep respect for the Magna Carta. They saw it as a symbol of their rights as English citizens, and they were angry when the British king violated those rights. When the colonists began to fight for independence, they turned to the Magna Carta for inspiration. Let's take a closer look at how the Magna Carta influenced the American Revolution. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which taxed all paper goods in the colonies: newspapers, books, legal documents, even playing cards. The colonists were furious. They argued that the Stamp Act was a violation of the Magna Carta because it taxed them without their consent. The Magna Carta's Clause 12 and 14 said that the king could not tax the people without the consent of the Common Council, which later became Parliament. The colonists argued that since they had no representation in the British Parliament, the Stamp Act was illegal. The colonists protested the Stamp Act, chanting "No taxation without representation," a phrase that would become the rallying cry of the American Revolution. They boycotted British goods, they held demonstrations, and they even destroyed the stamp paper. The British government eventually repealed the Stamp Act, but they passed other taxes, like the Tea Act, which led to the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Again, the colonists argued that these taxes were a violation of the Magna Carta, and they continued to fight for their rights. When the American Revolution began in 1775, the colonists used the Magna Carta to justify their fight for independence. They argued that the British king had violated their rights as English citizens, as guaranteed by the Magna Carta, and that they had the right to form a new government. The Declaration of Independence, written in 1776, included many ideas from the Magna Carta. For example, the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is an echo of the Magna Carta's guarantee of life and liberty. The idea that the government derives its power from the consent of the governed also comes from the Magna Carta. After the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers set out to create a new government for the United States. They wanted a government that would be limited in power, that would protect the rights of the people, and that would prevent any one person or group from having too much power. They turned to the Magna Carta for inspiration, and they included many of its principles in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, which was added to the Constitution in 1791, is particularly influenced by the Magna Carta. The First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech, religion, and the press, is an extension of the Magna Carta's guarantee of religious freedom. The Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, comes from the Magna Carta's protection of property. The Fifth Amendment, which guarantees due process of law, is a direct copy of Clause 39 of the Magna Carta. The Sixth Amendment, which guarantees a fair trial by jury, also comes from the Magna Carta. In fact, many of the Founding Fathers were avid students of the Magna Carta. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, all of them read the Magna Carta and studied its clauses. They believed that the Magna Carta was the foundation of all free governments, and they wanted to build a government that would live up to its principles. James Madison, who is often called the father of the Constitution, once said that the Magna Carta was the great charter of human liberty, and that it was the model for the U.S. Constitution. Let's tell another story, my dear, this time about a man named John Adams, one of the founding fathers and the second president of the United States. John Adams grew up in Massachusetts, and he studied law as a young man. He read the Magna Carta carefully, and he was deeply influenced by its principles. When the Stamp Act was passed in 1765, John Adams was one of the first to speak out against it. He wrote articles and gave speeches, arguing that the Stamp Act was a violation of the Magna Carta and the rights of the colonists. One day, John Adams was asked to defend a group of British soldiers who had been accused of killing 5 colonists in the Boston Massacre. Many people were angry with the soldiers, and they wanted them to be punished. But John Adams believed that everyone, even British soldiers, deserved a fair trial, a right guaranteed by the Magna Carta. He took the case, and he defended the soldiers vigorously. In the end, most of the soldiers were acquitted, because John Adams proved that they had acted in self-defense. John Adams later said that defending the soldiers was one of the most important things he ever did. He said that he did it because he believed in the principles of the Magna Carta, that everyone deserves a fair trial, no matter who they are, no matter what they have done. He believed that if the colonists wanted to be free, they had to uphold the rule of law, even when it was difficult. John Adams went on to play a crucial role in the American Revolution, and he helped draft the Declaration of Independence. He never forgot the lessons he learned from the Magna Carta, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that the new United States would be a country where the rule of law and the rights of the people were protected. Another founding father who was influenced by the Magna Carta was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a brilliant writer and a deep thinker, and he studied the Magna Carta extensively. He believed that the Magna Carta was a symbol of the people's right to rebel against a tyrannical government. When he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he drew heavily on the Magna Carta's principles. He wrote that all men are created equal, that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that the government's job is to protect these rights. These ideas are directly inspired by the Magna Carta, which had declared that even the king was not above the law and that the people had rights that could not be taken away. Jefferson also believed that the Magna Carta's principles should be extended to all people, not just free men. He was opposed to slavery, and he argued that slavery was a violation of the Magna Carta's guarantee of liberty. He wrote that all men are created equal, and he believed that this included enslaved people. Although he was not able to end slavery during his lifetime, he laid the groundwork for future generations to fight for the abolition of slavery, a fight that would continue for many years, and that would draw on the principles of the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta's influence on the United States did not end with the Founding Fathers. It has continued to shape American law and society throughout history. In the 19th century, the Magna Carta was used to fight for the rights of enslaved people. Abolitionists argued that slavery was a violation of the Magna Carta's guarantee of liberty, and they used its principles to demand the end of slavery. In the 20th century, the Magna Carta was used to fight for civil rights. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. drew on the Magna Carta's principles to argue against segregation and discrimination, and to demand equal rights for all Americans. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The court argued that segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees due process of law and equal protection under the law. The 14th Amendment, in turn, is deeply influenced by the Magna Carta's Clause 39, which guarantees due process of law. The court's decision was a landmark moment in the civil rights movement, and it was a continuation of the Magna Carta's legacy of freedom and equality. Even today, the Magna Carta continues to influence American law. In court cases involving civil rights, due process, and the limits of government power, judges often refer to the Magna Carta as a source of inspiration. The Magna Carta is not just a historical document, it is a living part of American society, a reminder of the values that we hold dear: freedom, justice, equality, and the rule of law. Let's think about the Magna Carta's legacy around the world, my dear. It is not just important to England and the United States, it is important to people everywhere. The Magna Carta's principles have been adopted by countries around the world, and they have been included in many constitutions and human rights documents. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, includes many ideas from the Magna Carta, ideas about liberty, equality, and the right to a fair trial. Eleanor Roosevelt, who played a key role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, called it the International Magna Carta for all men everywhere. In countries like India, South Africa, and Canada, the Magna Carta's principles have been used to fight for independence and human rights. In India, during the independence movement, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi drew on the Magna Carta's principles to argue against British rule and to demand freedom for the Indian people. In South Africa, during the apartheid era, anti-apartheid activists used the Magna Carta's principles to argue against segregation and discrimination, and to demand equal rights for all South Africans. In Canada, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, adopted in 1982, includes many ideas from the Magna Carta, including the right to a fair trial and the protection of property. The Magna Carta's legacy is also seen in the European Convention on Human Rights, which was adopted in 1950. The Convention guarantees many rights that are derived from the Magna Carta, including the right to life, the right to liberty and security, and the right to a fair trial. The European Court of Human Rights, which enforces the Convention, often refers to the Magna Carta as a source of inspiration. But the Magna Carta's legacy is not just in laws and constitutions, it is in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. It is a reminder that freedom is not something that is given to us, it is something that we must fight for, something that we must protect, something that we must pass on to future generations. It is a reminder that no one has the right to oppress others, that no one is above the law, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Let's go back to the original Magna Carta, the one signed in 1215. As we said earlier, for original copies still exist. Let's imagine what it would be like to hold one of those copies in our hands. It is made of parchment, which is thick and rough to the touch. It is yellowed with age, and the ink is faded in some places, but the words are still visible, neat, precise Latin handwriting, written by a scribe more than 800 years ago. The seal of King John is still there, a large, circular stamp pressed into the wax, though the wax has cracked and faded over time. When you hold that parchment, you are holding a piece of history that has shaped the world. You are holding the words that inspired the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You are holding the words that have given people around the world the courage to fight for their freedom, to stand up against oppression, to demand justice. You are holding a symbol of hope, a symbol of courage, a symbol of the belief that all people deserve to be free. But the Magna Carta is not just a relic of the past. It is a living document, a reminder that the fight for freedom and justice is never over. There are still places in the world where people are imprisoned without a trial, where their rights are taken away, where they live in fear. There are still people who are oppressed, who are discriminated against, who are denied the basic rights that we take for granted. But the Magna Carta reminds us that we can change that we can stand up for what is right, that we can fight for justice, that we can make the world a better place. My dear, as we come to the end of our story, I want you to remember one thing. The Magna Carta is not just about the past, it is about you. It is about your right to be free, to be happy, to be safe. It is about your responsibility to stand up for those who are less fortunate, to fight for justice, to make the world a better place. It is about the legacy that you will leave behind, the legacy of courage, of kindness, of hope. The moon is now high in the sky, and the world is quiet. The story of the Magna Carta is a long one, but it is a story that is worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing on. It is a story of freedom, of courage, of hope, a story that will never die. As you drift off to sleep, remember the words of the Magna Carta. Remember that you are free, that you are loved, that you have the power to make a difference. Remember that you are part of a great legacy, a legacy of freedom that began in a meadow by the River Thames, and that will continue for all time. Good night, my dear. Sleep tight. And may the spirit of the Magna Carta be with you always. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on the key moments of the Magna Carta story, so that we can remember them always. We started in 1215, in Runnymede, where King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta by the rebel barons. We talked about the clauses of the Magna Carta, especially Clause 39, which guarantees due process of law. We talked about how King John tried to annul the Magna Carta, and how it was reissued after his death. We talked about how the Magna Carta was rediscovered in the 16th century by scholars like Sir Edward Coke, and how it became a symbol of liberty in England. We talked about how the Magna Carta influenced the American colonies, the American Revolution, and the U.S. Constitution. We talked about how the Magna Carta's principles have spread around the world, inspiring people to fight for their freedom and their rights. Each of these moments is important, my dear, because they show us how a single document can change the world. They show us that courage and determination can overcome tyranny and oppression. They show us that freedom is a gift that must be cherished and protected. Let's also think about the people who made the Magna Carta possible. Robert Fitzwalter, the leader of the rebel barons, who had the courage to stand up to a king. Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who helped draft the document and who fought for peace. Rupert, the young parchment maker's son, who witnessed the signing and passed on the story. Sir Edward Coke, who rediscovered the Magna Carta and made it famous again. The Founding Fathers, who used the Magna Carta's principles to build a new country. Martin Luther King Jr., who used the Magna Carta's principles to fight for civil rights. All of these people, and many more, have helped to carry on the legacy of the Magna Carta. And now, it is our turn. It is our turn to carry on the legacy of the Magna Carta. It is our turn to stand up for what is right, to fight for justice, to protect the rights of others. It is our turn to be kind, to be brave, to be hopeful. Because the Magna Carta's legacy is not just in the past, it is in the present, and it is in the future. It is in you, and it is in me. As we finish our story tonight, I want to leave you with a quote from Sir Edward Coke, the scholar who helped rediscover the Magna Carta. He said, "The Magna Carta is such a fellow, that he will have no sovereign." What he meant is that the Magna Carta is above any king, any government, any person. It is a symbol of the rule of law, of the idea that no one is above the law. It is a symbol of freedom, of the idea that all people deserve to be free. My dear, let that quote be your guide. Let the Magna Carta be your guide. Let it remind you that you are free, that you have rights, that you have the power to make a difference. Let it remind you that even in the darkest times, there is hope. Let it remind you that the fight for freedom and justice is never over, but it is a fight that is worth fighting. The night is growing late, and the moon is beginning to set. It is time for you to sleep, my dear. But before you do, let's say a little prayer for the Magna Carta, for the people who fought for it, and for the world that it has shaped. Let's pray that we will always remember its principles, that we will always stand up for what is right, that we will always protect the freedom that it has given us. Good night, my love. Sleep well. And remember, freedom is a gift, and it is our job to cherish it, to protect it, to pass it on. The Magna Carta story is our story, and it will live on forever. As we continue to explore the Magna Carta story, let's delve deeper into the lives of the people who were affected by it. Ordinary people, not just kings and noblemen. Because the Magna Carta was not just a document for the powerful, it was a document that changed the lives of everyday people in ways big and small. Let's meet a woman named Eleanor, who lived in England in the 13th century, shortly after the Magna Carta was signed. Eleanor was a widow, and her husband had died in a war. Under the laws of the time, when a man died, his land and property would be taken by the king, and the widow would be left with nothing. She would often be forced to remarry a man chosen by the king, so that the king could keep control of the land. But the Magna Carta changed that. Clause 7 of the Magna Carta said that a widow could not be forced to remarry, and that she could keep her husband's property for the rest of her life. Eleanor was one of the first women to benefit from this clause. When her husband died, the king's men came to take her land, but Eleanor stood up to them. She told them about the Magna Carta, about Clause 7, and she refused to remarry. The king's men had no choice but to leave her alone. Eleanor was able to keep her land, and she was able to raise her children in peace. She never forgot the Magna Carta, and she told her daughters about it, so that they would know their rights. Eleanor's story is just one example of how the Magna Carta changed the lives of ordinary people. It gave them hope, it gave them security, it gave them freedom. Another ordinary person whose life was changed by the Magna Carta was a blacksmith named Gareth. Gareth lived in a small village in southern England, not far from Runnymede. He was a strong man, with calloused hands from years of hammering iron, and a kind heart that made him loved by everyone in the village. Gareth made horseshoes for the farmers' horses, tools for the villagers, and even small iron trinkets for the children. He worked hard every day, from dawn until dusk, and he was proud of his work that helped his community thrive. But before the Magna Carta, Gareth's life was not easy. The local lord, a man named Lord Berkeley, had the power to demand whatever he wanted from the villagers. Every month, Gareth had to give Lord Berkeley a portion of his ironwork, horseshoes, tools, even the trinkets he made for the children, for free. If he refused, Lord Berkeley's men would come to his forge, destroy his tools, and even throw him in jail. Gareth resented this, but he had no choice. He was not a nobleman, he was a common man, and in those days, common men had no rights against the powerful. Then, after the Magna Carta was signed, everything changed. Clause 20 of the Magna Carta said that no free man should be fined unfairly, and that punishment should fit the crime. Clause 30 said that no lord should take a man's property without his consent. Gareth heard about these clauses from a traveling merchant, who had read the Magna Carta in London. At first, Gareth did not believe it. How could a piece of parchment change the way lords treated common men? But he decided to hope, to hold on to the idea that things might get better. One month, when Lord Berkeley's men came to take Gareth's ironwork, Gareth stood up to them. "I will not give you my work for free," he said, his voice steady. "The Magna Carta says you cannot take my property without my consent. You cannot fine me unfairly, and you cannot punish me for refusing to give you what is mine." The men laughed at him at first. They told him that the Magna Carta was for noblemen, not blacksmiths. But Gareth stood firm. He told them to go back to Lord Berkeley and tell him that he would not be bullied anymore. Lord Berkeley was furious when he heard what Gareth had said. He sent more men to the village, determined to teach Gareth a lesson. But when the men arrived, they found the villagers standing with Gareth, farmers, weavers, bakers, all of them tired of being bullied by Lord Berkeley. They told the men that the Magna Carta applied to all free men, not just noblemen, and that they would not let Gareth be punished for standing up for his rights. Lord Berkeley had no choice but to back down. He realized that the Magna Carta had changed things, that the people were no longer willing to be pushed around. From that day on, Lord Berkeley stopped demanding free ironwork from Gareth. He even paid Gareth a fair price for any work he needed done. Gareth's forge thrived, and he was able to provide a better life for his wife and children. He told everyone in the village about the Magna Carta, about how it had given him the courage to stand up for himself, and about how it had given all of them a voice. Gareth's story is another reminder that the Magna Carta was not just for kings and noblemen, it was for ordinary people, people like you and me, people who work hard, who love their families, who just want to be treated fairly. It was for the blacksmiths, the farmers, the weavers, the widows, the children, all of the people who make up a community, all of the people who deserve to be free. As the years passed, Gareth's children grew up, and he told them the story of the Magna Carta, of King John, of the rebel barons, and of the day he stood up to Lord Berkeley. He told them that freedom is not something that is given to you. It is something that you have to stand up for, something that you have to protect. He told them that the Magna Carta was a seed that had been planted in Runnymede, and that it was their job to help it grow, to make sure that its principles were passed on to future generations. My dear, as we listen to Gareth's story, let's think about how far we have come. More than 800 years ago, a blacksmith had to stand up to a lord to keep his hard-earned work. Today, we have rights that Gareth could only dream of, rights to work, to be paid fairly, to be treated with dignity, to stand up for ourselves without fear. All of these rights have their roots in the Magna Carta, in the words that were written so long ago. But let's not forget that the Magna Carta's journey is not over. There are still people in the world who are like Gareth, people who have to stand up for their rights, people who are treated unfairly because of who they are or where they live. But the Magna Carta reminds us that we are not alone, that the courage of those who came before us is with us, that the words of freedom and justice are still powerful, that we can make a difference. Let's tell another story, a story about a boy named Liam who lived in England in the 1400s, 200 years after the Magna Carta was signed. Liam was a shepherd boy, and he spent his days tending to his family's sheep on the hills outside the village. He was a quiet boy, but he loved to listen to the stories the village elder told, stories about the Magna Carta, about the brave men who had stood up to King John, about the freedom that the document had brought to England. One day, a group of bandits came to the village. They stole the villagers' sheep, their crops, their money, everything they had. The villagers were terrified. They went to the local sheriff, begging him to help, but the sheriff refused. He said that he had no authority to stop the bandits, that the king's men were too far away, that there was nothing he could do. Liam remembered the stories about the Magna Carta. He remembered that the Magna Carta said that the king and his officials had a duty to protect the people, that no one should be robbed or harmed without justice. He decided to do something. He took a piece of parchment and wrote a letter to the king, telling him about the bandits, about how the sheriff had refused to help, about how the villagers were suffering. He didn't know if the king would read his letter, but he had to try. Liam traveled to London, a journey that took him 3 days. He was tired and hungry when he arrived, but he was determined. He went to the king's palace and asked to see the king. The guards laughed at him. What was a shepherd boy doing asking to see the king? But Liam refused to leave. He told them about the Magna Carta, about his letter, about the villagers who needed help. To everyone's surprise, the king heard about Liam and agreed to see him. Liam gave the king his letter, and the king read it carefully. He was angry when he heard about the bandits and the sheriff's refusal to help. He sent his men to the village, and the bandits were caught and punished. The villagers got their sheep and their crops back, and the sheriff was removed from his job for failing to protect the people. Liam became a hero in the village. The villagers thanked him for his courage, for standing up for them, for remembering the principles of the Magna Carta. Liam told them that he had not done it alone, that the Magna Carta had given him the courage to speak up, that the stories of the brave men before him had inspired him. He said that anyone, even a shepherd boy, could make a difference if they believed in freedom and justice. My dear, Liam's story teaches us that courage comes in all sizes. You don't have to be a nobleman, a blacksmith, or a king to stand up for what is right. You can be a shepherd boy, a young girl, a child like you, and still make a difference. The Magna Carta is not just about powerful people. It is about ordinary people, people who have the courage to believe that things can be better, people who have the courage to stand up for what is right. As the moon continues to shine outside your window, my dear, let's think about all the stories we have told tonight. Stories of King John and the rebel barons, of Rupert the parchment maker's son, of Thomas the serf, of Sarah the colonist, of Eleanor the widow, of Gareth the blacksmith, of Liam the shepherd boy. All of these stories are part of the Magna Carta's legacy, a legacy of courage, of hope, of freedom. Each of these people, in their own way, help to carry on the Magna Carta's message. They help to plant the seed of freedom, to water it, to make it grow. And today, that seed has grown into a tree whose branches stretch across the world, whose leaves are the rights and freedoms we enjoy, whose roots are the words of the Magna Carta, written more than 800 years ago. You are part of that legacy, my dear. You are part of the story of the Magna Carta. Every time you are kind to someone, every time you stand up for what is right, every time you hope for a better world, you are carrying on the legacy of those who came before you. You are helping the tree of freedom grow, helping its branches reach even farther, helping its roots grow even deeper. The night is getting late, and your eyes are getting heavy. I know you are tired, my love. But before you sleep, let's take one more moment to remember the Magna Carta, not as a piece of old parchment, but as a living, breathing symbol of hope. Remember that it is a reminder that freedom is possible, that justice is possible, that even the smallest voice can make a difference. Imagine yourself in Runnymede, on that warm June day in 1215. Imagine the grass beneath your feet, the sound of the River Thames flowing by, the voices of the brave men who signed the Magna Carta. Imagine the hope in their hearts, the courage in their souls, the belief that they were changing the world for the better. That hope is still alive today, in you, in me, in all of us. As you drift off to sleep, let that hope wrap around you like a warm blanket. Let the stories of the Magna Carta be your dreams, dreams of freedom, of justice, of a world where everyone is treated with kindness and respect. Let the spirit of the Magna Carta be with you, guiding you, protecting you, inspiring you. Good night, my dear. Sleep tight. Remember that you are free, that you are loved, that you have the power to make a difference. Remember that the Magna Carta story is your story, and it will live on in you forever. And when you wake up tomorrow, remember this: the fight for freedom and justice is not over, but you are part of it. You are part of the legacy of the Magna Carta, part of the hope that began in a meadow by the River Thames, part of the change that the world needs. Sleep now, my love. The moon is shining, the world is quiet, and the Magna Carta's whispers of freedom are surrounding you. Sweet dreams, and may the courage and hope of the Magna Carta be with you always. As we continue to wander through the Magna Carta's history, let's think about how it has shaped not just laws, but hearts. The Magna Carta is not just a legal document, it is a moral compass, a reminder of what is right, of what we owe to each other. It reminds us that we are all connected, that our freedom is tied to the freedom of others, that we cannot be truly free if others are oppressed. Let's meet a woman named Margaret, who lived in the 1500s, during the time when Sir Edward Coke was rediscovering the Magna Carta. Margaret was a teacher, a rare thing for a woman in those days. She ran a small school in a village, teaching young boys and girls to read and write. She believed that education was the key to freedom, that if people could read and understand the Magna Carta, they could stand up for their rights. Margaret had a copy of the Magna Carta, a tattered, hand-copied version that she had inherited from her father. Every day, after teaching the children their letters and numbers, she would read them parts of the Magna Carta. She would explain what the words meant, how they had changed the world, how they could change their lives. She would tell them about the rebel barons, about Stephen Langton, about all the people who had fought for freedom. One of her students was a young girl named Anne, who was the daughter of a serf, and had never been to school before. She had spent her days working in the fields, helping her family. But Margaret had seen how bright Anne was, how eager she was to learn, and she had invited her to the school for free, and loved listening to the stories of the Magna Carta. She dreamed of a day when she and her family would be free, when they would not have to work for a lord, when they would have the right to own their own land. Margaret told Anne that the Magna Carta was a seed, and that education was the water that would make it grow. She told her that if she kept learning, if she kept believing, she could help make her dreams come true, and took Margaret's words to heart. She studied hard, she read every book she could find, and she told her family and friends about the Magna Carta, about the rights they deserved. When Anne grew up, she became a teacher too, just like Margaret. She opened her own school, teaching other serfs' children to read and write, teaching them about the Magna Carta. She continued Margaret's work, passing on the legacy of freedom, passing on the hope that had been planted in Runnymede so many years before. Over time, more and more serfs began to demand their rights, inspired by the Magna Carta, inspired by teachers like Margaret and Anne. And slowly, serfdom in England began to fade, replaced by freedom and equality. My dear, Margaret and Anne's story shows us that education is a powerful tool for freedom. It shows us that knowledge is power, that when people understand their rights, they can stand up for themselves, they can fight for justice, they can change the world. The Magna Carta is not just about words on a page. It is about understanding those words, about believing in them, about acting on them. As you lie here, safe and warm, listening to this story, remember that you are lucky to have the chance to learn, to read, to understand your rights. Remember that there are children in the world who do not have that chance, who do not know about the Magna Carta, who do not know that they deserve to be free. But you can help change that, by learning, by sharing what you know, by standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. The moon is beginning to fade, my dear, and the first light of dawn is starting to peek through the window. Our story of the Magna Carta is long, but it is not over. It will continue tomorrow, and the next day, and for all the days to come, because the Magna Carta is not just a story from the past, it is a story for the present, a story for the future, a story that will never end. Before you wake up, let's say one last thing about the Magna Carta. It is a story of hope. Hope that things can get better, hope that courage can overcome tyranny, hope that freedom can prevail. It is a hope that has been passed down from generation to generation, a hope that is alive in you right now. Good night, my dear. Sleep well. And when you wake up, remember that you are part of something bigger, part of the Magna Carta's legacy, part of the hope that will change the world. The Magna Carta, a story of freedom, a story of courage, a story of hope, a story for you, a story for me, a story for all time.